Very good. All right. So we can do this as a conversation if you'd like.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Very good.
Yeah.
So for everyone who will be watching this, welcome. I'm super stoked and excited. I have Shona here, and we're going to talk about anxiety today and what it is, how it affects us, and how we can manage, or even if it is a treatable thing as well. So thanks so much for your time and joining me today.
No, absolute pleasure. Pleasure, Chris.
So before we get too far into it, could we just hear a little bit of your own background as well?
Oh, yeah. Well, I am a clinical and forensic psychologist. So the clinical psychology bit means that I work with lots of people in relation to their mental health predominantly. So things like depression, anxiety, stress, substance abuse, all sorts of different things, or even just if people haven't got a diagnosis but are just struggling with day-to-day issues in their life. As a forensic psychologist, I use my psychology powers to help people who may have been a victim of a crime or may have actually committed a crime. So I assist the courts or the prisons or the offenders or the victims to help chart a way out of the feelings associated with the offences.
Oh, wonderful. So a lot of background, that is for sure. So let's touch on what actually is anxiety.
Yeah, anxiety is one of my favourite things to talk about, Chris, because it's something that everyone has. You know, in fact, if we didn't have anxiety, I would be very worried. If a person said that they were never anxious, I would be rather worried about them for lots of reasons. Because anxiety is our body's way of taking care of us. So it has to do with our body's defence mechanism. And anxiety is a feeling that we get when our system, or someone we care about system, is under threat. So it's a feeling that triggers action within our body. Usually the typical way that psychologists will often describe anxiety, Chris, is talking about how someone might react if they were, if for some reason a tiger suddenly wandered in to their room. And so I've actually got some a technical drawing I've been working on here.
Oh, love it. Yep.
You can see why I chose psychology and not art. So imagine this is you, Chris. And imagine you're walking through the jungle. It looks a bit like you. Imagine you're walking through the jungle.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you see that tiger. So all of a sudden, and the tiger's not a friendly, cuddly tiger cub. It's a big, scary one, and it's got its teeth out, and it's looking right at you, and it's got its claws, and it's ready to go. So basically, you would kind of anticipate that you would register that as a threat. So what would you need to do, Chris, in order to manage that tiger? What would you have to do?
I guess, like, for me, instantly, I would just be running. I'd be like, not today.
Yeah, that's right. Most people would want to get the heck out of there and move really quickly. And so what we are automatically kind of wired to do is when we see a threat against us, is our body is designed to change without us having to tell our body to do that. It will automatically flick into what we call the fight and flight response. And so if you're going to run, and I'm using your special PT knowledge here, Chris, then you're going to need some muscles.
Absolutely.
And so what happens is our muscles, when we're experiencing fight and flight, or we need to escape a tiger, our muscles get tense, kind of like a rubber band pulled back, ready to go. Because if we're going to run away from this tiger, we're going to need the big muscles in our arms and our legs to get us out of there fast. Yeah, and we need those muscles to be ready to go, like that elastic band pulled back. So we might have to climb a tree or jump a fence or just bolt out of there. So we need our muscles to be in prime condition. And so that means we need blood flow to those muscles. So what happens is our heart starts to work faster, because it's got the amazing job of pushing all the blood around to the big muscles, which are in the extremities of our body. So we need that extra push from our heart to get the blood there. And also, we need that blood to be oxygenated. It needs to have lots of fresh air in it. And so our breathing starts to change if we're going to run away from a tiger, or even if we're going to fight the tiger. our breathing will change. So our breathing will start to get faster and shallower. So our lungs, instead of breathing kind of big, deep lung belly kind of breaths that you might learn if you're doing yoga or something, you instead start to just breathe in a very shallow way. And that means you're taking in lots of air really quickly, which means that your blood is really oxygenated and those muscles are then really happy. And so that takes a lot of energy without kind of even recognizing that it's taken any energy. Haven't even started running yet. And so what we need to do is our body needs to take some energy away from other parts of the body, or some focus away from other parts of the body. So if you're running from a tiger in the jungle, Chris, you don't need to necessarily stop and have a sandwich. And so what happens is sometimes our bellies go offline. Sometimes when people are really anxious, they might even wee or poo themselves. But for most people, they get an uncomfortable feeling in their belly because their digestion has just gone, we don't need to digest right now. So the body goes, we've got other busy things to do. We'll come back to that later. And so people will often experience butterflies in their tummy, sometimes when they're feeling this fight and flight response in their body. And the other important thing that happens is our brain starts to change too. So if I'm running from the tiger, or if this is you running from the tiger, Chris, then you don't need to work out how to calculate the area of an equilateral triangle.
Yeah, thankfully.
Then you don't need to even remember to get milk and bread on the way home. So all you need to do is to be thinking about the tiger. And so there are changes to our brain that make it only possible to think about the scary thing. And that kind of helps us keep this whole system going, because if we're not thinking about the scary thing, if we are thinking about milk and bread, then the system will revert back to other things and we might slow down and then we'll be tiger tucker. So the whole system works really cleverly together. And it's the feeling from all of these changes in our brain and our body that we call anxiety. And so we need that when we're fighting tigers. We don't need that though if we're doing a presentation, or if we're starting our first day at a new job, or if we're about to go on our first date. And so what has happened over time is that we have kind of changed what it is that feels tigery to us. So individual threats are a very individual thing. So some people like snakes, not me. A snake is equivalent to tiger to me. I will get a fight and flight response if I see a snake. Other people, the Irwins, for instance, they're totally down with snakes, so they wouldn't get that. So a lot of it is what our brain perceives to be the threat that triggers this fight and flight response. Okay, so you've run from the tiger, Chris, you've got all these feelings going, and you run from the tiger and you turn around and see that the tiger's, or maybe it's been blow darted by someone else in your tribe, and it's kind of lying there. It's not a threat anymore. What happens then is your brain goes, no more threat, and it will do this thing where it goes, so you'll stop running and your heart rate will start to go back to normal. Your muscles will have spent all of that tension. You might have gotten sweaty too in that time. The sweat might start to kick in and actually cool you down. And your brain will go, hang on, I'm supposed to get milk and bread on the way. You better go, yeah, bread, I could use a sandwich. So things start to kick back in to their normal kind of relaxed routine. Sometimes instead of calling it the opposite of the kind of fight and flight response, people sometimes call the rest and digest response. And so our body is kind of mediating between these two opposites most of the time as it negotiates life. And so anxiety is the feeling that we get when we're coming up against a threat. And so, sometimes that can become a disorder if we're getting it often, and that feeling and the behaviours that we use to try and manage that feeling get in the way of us having a happy and fulfilling life.
It's super cool though, hey, just like all these little things just working in one.
Yeah, absolutely. We are well-oiled machines from the inside. And the other thing is, as I said before, a lot of anxiety depends on what we perceive as a threat. So if we have had some awful things happen, say in our childhood, then our brain will be kind of trained to see certain reminders and things, as people can sometimes call them triggers. Sometimes we can get some reprogramming in our brain that's happened because of trauma. And so exposure to certain things that remind us of that can be enough to trigger this fight and flight response in us. And so what it means is also, Chris, remember before I said if you were running away from the tiger, that someone in your tribe may have blow darted the tiger. The other thing about being human is despite all of the extra PT I do, I'm still a pretty vulnerable person. I'm a vulnerable creature. You know, I'm really working on getting stronger, but at the end of the day, I've got kind of human skin. I've got long nails, but they're certainly not talons. I haven't got big teeth. I haven't got thick, tough skin or a shell. And so we're pretty vulnerable. And our safety comes from having tribe and being connected to others who can do the blow darting while we're doing the running. And so sometimes a lot of anxiety is experienced when we perceive that we don't have tribe, when we feel isolated or alone, or we feel like we're not good enough for the tribe. And so we can start to experience some sort of social anxieties. And we're just designed to function better in teams as humans. We really require teamwork in order to survive.
And I guess that's the craziest thing, I guess, over time, especially now, because it is so easy to be isolated as a person, especially obviously during COVID and such. So what do you think that the disconnection from other people is the biggest cause for anxiety in this day and age, and how could people possibly reconnect from that disconnection?
It's definitely a factor. There are lots of complications in terms of what actually causes an individual to be anxious, but I see it something we call it a perpetuating factor. I think it's something that can make some pre-existing anxiety feel worse if we're not connected enough. And I think you're right. I think there are some societal things, Chris, that can really add to our anxious load, because it wasn't that long ago in terms of human development. It wasn't that long ago that we were living this being chased by a tiger, living in tribe blow darting kind of life. It wasn't that many generations ago. And so what happens is society has changed much faster, I think, than our bodies have been able to adapt. Yeah. And so also because we've got these amazing brains and they've got the ability to do so many things that never cease to blow my mind, imagination, the potential humans have. We also have the potential to kind of overthink things sometimes, or to think about the worst case scenario. And as soon as we start to do that, the incredible thing about humans is that the tiger doesn't actually have to be with us right here and right now for us to feel anxious. We can have a memory of a tiger, or we can anticipate we're having a meeting with the tiger next week, and all of these symptoms in our body can start to be turned on. So we have this ability to kind of time travel because we've got this incredible brain, and that can actually make our anxiety worse. So we can get all worked up without even leaving the comfort of our home, just by thinking things through. And that's part of the secret of managing. If we're well connected and we can manage our thoughts, Chris, and we can make sure that they're not too tigery, or even solve the problems that might be there that are making us feel like our thoughts are tigery, then we're going to come a long way to fixing or managing anxiety. We don't ever want it to completely go away. We just want it to work for us when it absolutely needs to, and to not be there when we don't need it. And it will come on. We don't have to leave our anxiety kind of running like the engine of a car. It's clear enough in our system. It will come on when we need it. We don't need to kind of just keep the door open and one foot out the door for an escape, because our bodies will allow us to do that if we really, really need to. So a lot of people, I think, keep their anxiety switched on just in case. But you can actually let go of it in a moment, and it will come back if you need it.
Yeah, I think something, I don't know, like I see a lot as a personal trainer as well. You can tell if someone's in that fight or flight, and probably like out of the 10 people I see, in a time frame, I'd say probably 9 of those people are constantly on fight or flight, and they might have been in that fight or flight for days too, which is the scary thing.
Yes. Yeah. And so what happens with that fight and flight, Chris, is it's not necessarily that they've been in it for days. What happens is it kind of comes in waves. So it will come. So we'll think of the scary thought or be exposed to something scary, and the anxiety will come in, but then it will drop away of its own accord. All of this busy stuff takes too much energy to keep switched on at full blast all the time. So some people keep it running slowly underneath, but the majority of the time it comes and goes depending on where people are focusing their attention. So if they're focusing on the scary thing, if they think PT is scary, then they're going
Yeah.
to have increased anxiety at that point in time. But the other thing they're getting from personal training is the ability to spend some of this tension, the ability to make their breathing faster, and then to feel really and slow it down at the end of a session, and to get all of those extra endorphins going, and to be too busy balancing on one foot to be able to think about how many other things
Absolutely.
they're going on in your brain, and in what happened yesterday or last year and what might happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so there are many benefits of exercise in terms of keeping anxiety at a manageable level.
And to get a little bit nerdy, because I always like it when we can get a little bit nerdy, when we talk about like chemicals and stuff, like what kind of happens in the brain?
Well, we get this. It's certainly a biochemical reaction, but it's very much which parts of the brain are activated. And what happens with anxiety is it activates the really most primitive part of our brain. So I kind of think about the brain as having its really primitive. I call it the chook brain, because I have chooks, and my chooks are lovely, but they aren't. They're pretty primitive. So they can lay eggs, they can eat, they can poo. And they can reproduce, and they can run fast when they see a tiger or my dog or whichever thing is frightening them, or even any other thing that moves fast or they've got a pretty big startle response. So that is, we have that very primitive response as well. And because this anxiety response takes so much energy, our brain will revert to those most primitive parts to manage anxiety. The more developed parts of our brain are the thinking parts and the cortex. And so if we can keep our cortex engaged before we kind of go totally chook brain, we can talk ourselves out of a full-blown panic attack with anxiety. When we are in a full-blown panic attack, though, we can't talk ourselves out of it. We actually just have to ride the waves of our chook brain and make sure that we feel as safe as we can, and that we're learning to slow our breathing down, and that we're not kind of traumatizing ourselves with more ongoing scary thoughts, and we can calm ourselves down. And when we're calmer, it's a bit like the belly coming back on and being hungry. Our brain can come back on, and we can think, and we can think through logical solutions to our problems rather than just going like my. So we can actually ground ourselves, and that will kind of try and hold on to those higher levels of our brain, but they take a whole lot more energy and a whole lot more kind of maturity as well to be able to switch on. And so our default option, which is again a fantastic invention, and that's why we've still got it. Our default option will override any higher level options if we're really scared.
Yeah. And how do you, I know when I was younger, understanding anxiety, I had no idea what it was until I reckon probably about 20 was the first time I ever heard of anxiety in my life.
Yeah.
Because I just was not informed about it. How do you manage anxiety if you do get to a point of like panic attacks, or is it just about accepting those emotions in that moment, or is there anything to it?
Well, accepting the emotions is a big start, because what can happen when people get panicky is then they start to make the panic itself a tiger, Chris. They start to get worried about the worry, or start to go, oh no, this is really embarrassing. Last time I did this, I wet my pants, or that guy I was trying to impress, must think I'm a real loser now. You just get into this bandwagon of thoughts that can just keep the anxiety fueled. And so what can be helpful to we call it grounding strategies. It can be helpful to take yourself somewhere calm, or even if it's, say, anxiety never seems to be convenient.
Yeah.
It often happens where there's lots of kind of stimulation and where we can't make an easy escape. And so some of the things I talk to my clients about are, if it happens in the supermarket, grab a tin of something off the shelf, just pretend you're having a good read of it, lower your eyes down, because our brain will be scanning for tigers, and so you have to kind of force it to just lower it down. You don't actually have to read. You probably can't read the ingredients on your baked beans, but just focus on something so that you don't look like you're standing out too much in the supermarket. And then check in with your breathing and make sure that your breath is slowing down. this whole idea of keeping this switched on is really closely linked to our breathing, Chris. And so if we're taking in extra oxygen, that's keeping that, it's the oxygen balance in our brain that keeps the panic kind of fueled. So too much oxygen can make us more panicky. And sometimes some people who have panic attacks have often had the paramedics come, because it's a very similar feeling to having a heart attack. And of course they go, oh no, God, I'm having a heart attack, and that adds to the tigeriness of it. And so sometimes the paramedics, once they've worked out it's actually not, there's no other signs of a heart attack, sometimes they'll give people a paper bag and just get them to breathe out, breathe in the air they've breathed out, because it doesn't have as much oxygen in it, it has more carbon dioxide in it. And that slows down the oxygen, which can fuel that panic fire. So sometimes even just cupping your hands over your mouth, looking down, cupping your hands over your mouth, taking some slow breaths in, not big breaths, because you don't want to fuel that fire with extra oxygen. And it's more, I think, about making sure you breathe all the way out.
Yeah.
The next breath in, that you slow your breathing down and breathe out. And then say just some really calming things. And the calming things are going to depend, they're going to vary from individual to individual, Chris, depending on what the tiger is, but also what our experience is and what's been soothing for us in our childhoods or whatever. So sometimes it might be, it's okay, I've got my happy song playing in my head, it's okay, everything's going to be all right, there's nothing to worry about here, I've got this, and just wait for that wave of panic to slow down. And then when it slows down, give yourself a really good pat on the back for managing that moment, and work towards the next moment and then the moment after that. But having that grounding ability. And sometimes I tell people about something I call the three things thing. The three things thing.
The three things.
Is really something that is trying to make a gateway, I think, between our primitive brains and our higher level thinking. So our primitive brains are very much just about our basic senses. And so if you give your brain something else to do other than think about the tiger, things like, what are three things you can see right now? And you just name, three things. Yeah. What are three things you can feel on your body right now? And then you name the three things. And then what are three things that you can hear right now? And this one really works for me, Chris, because it's almost like I've got to stop the chatter in my brain to stop and concentrate and listen for what three things I can hear. And then take some slow breaths. And if people are still feeling anxious, go back and do another three, but a different three from the first three that they thought of. And just using the actual things that are here and now that you can touch, that you can see, and that you can hear, just to ground yourself in the moment and try to take your mind off whatever the scary thing might be. Because often you can hear background noise, or you can hear a bird in the tree. All of those things can be really, really calming. And basically, there are lots of things you can do in that time. Eventually, you will calm down. The thing about our clever bodies, Chris, is that no one actually ever kind of dies of the anxiety. They tend to die of the things that they do to try and avoid these anxious feelings. They tend to die because they've been drinking to try and wash away their social anxiety, or because they've been working too hard to try and avoid having conversations with someone at home, or they've been gambling too much because they've got financial problems. So it's more likely that the feeling doesn't harm us. It's what we do often to avoid the feeling that can get us into big trouble. So as you said, there is a need to kind of accept it and to go, hey, I kind of call it doing the David Attenborough, to just David Attenborough yourself and go, oh, look at that. So, there it is again. So, oh, look, now it's going. No, it's back. No, it's going. And just to go with the ebb and flow of the feelings in your body.
And that's quite good too, being the commentator of your own life, because I guess that also would make you feel a little bit in control, which would kind of bring you back in a bit too, which is cool.
Yeah, as long as it's not the commentary that, oh my goodness, I'm having a heart attack.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to know that these, the changes to your heart, and sometimes people do get pains because their muscles are tight. But those, are actually part of the feeling. And if you can let go about the panic in relation to those symptoms, then you can calm yourself down much more quickly.
Oh, that's good. I love that. I love fun facts. This is great. To dive into a little bit more about not only managing it, but is there, like, for a lot of people, I guess, like, the thing that makes people, well, I know for me, like, especially, I like to know, like, those are the things I can manage, but is there anything that helps you foresee that you might be heading towards a little bit of an anxiety attack, or you might feel identifying
that
anxiety?
sounds like a very anxious thought. It sounds like a worry.
Yeah.
To me. And so we have to be careful not to worry about worry. We do have to kind of really work hard on acceptance. It sounds like something that's simple when I talk about it here, but I know it's really tricky for people because people have got lifelong habits about how they think. And if we don't, if we've lived most of our lives without even knowing what anxiety was, then it's silly to expect we're going to be able to nail managing it straight away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there are lots of interventions in schools and even in preschools now and kindies that are targeting mindfulness and meditation to see if we can't put it in young people's toolboxes especially before they have to go through all the angst that is the teenage years. So I just like to think, if I cast my mind back and go, wow, if I knew about this stuff when I was little, there'd be so many times that I would have been able to, in hindsight and with the wisdom of hindsight, I would have nailed that. Or I could have got some extra help on that, or I could have just done this instead. So I think it's really important that we educate young people and ourselves about how our bodies and minds work together. And anxiety is one of those feelings, as I said, that people really want to avoid. And so they will go to big lengths to avoid it. They will go to big lengths to sometimes even avoid the tribe as well, or even a commitment to another person. There's often a lot of anxiety that stops us committing in relationships and things as well. And so people will spend a whole lot of time trying to avoid anxiety, which actually ends up creating ironically, more anxiety for people in the longer term.
And just out of curiosity, just because my brain's still about this, why do you think people avoid? I know it seems kind of like you avoid it to not feel anxious, but why? I've always wondered, like, why don't people go towards it as well?
Yeah, I think lots of people do. There are plenty of people who do go towards relationships, but I think to be in a very loving and intimate relationship, to be in a good one involves taking some risks, which is kind of the last thing that people who are experiencing anxiety want to even begin to think about. But when we're in relationships that are healthy, we can be at our most absolute vulnerable and know that the other person in the relationship or the other people in the relationship have really got our backs. And that's what if I had a magic wand, I would wish that for everybody. An idea that we can be, that people genuinely care enough for us that they would have our back regardless of what tigers or other anxiety-provoking things come into our life. And so what that means is people don't like that feeling of vulnerability, Chris. They don't like that feeling because it means we have to be honest. It means we have to be real. We have to accept, the bodies we're given. We have to accept our that we're emotional at times. We have to accept a whole lot of things, and we also have to sometimes take that big leap of faith towards deciding whether the person we're about to join into a relationship with is that person who truly does have our backs. And I guess the only way we ultimately get to know that is by being vulnerable with them and we both pass the test of that. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. Hey, like, vulnerability is huge. Like, I never used to be vulnerable, and then I'm still young, but I'm still learning as we go.
I think it's there are lots of social ideas about especially for gendered social ideas for men in particular, about the idea that vulnerability isn't very manly, and but even a lot of the female clients I see, Chris, really talk. One of their worries, one of their ongoing tigers that they generate for themselves, is this idea that they should be stronger, and not in a Chris Walker personal training stronger way, but in a kind of emotionally stronger way. They feel like they shouldn't be getting sad about sad things, that they should, but it's perfectly okay to feel sad when sad things happen. It's okay to feel angry when crusty, frustrating, angry things happen. And again, people tend to, not like the feelings. They want to get cranky about the feelings rather than getting cranky about the thing that's avoiding the feel, that is generating the feeling or is the problem in the first place. And this is why I love the Disney Pixar movie Inside Out, Chris.
Inside Out. Oh, that's the little people in there.
Yeah, the little emotions. Each character is a little emotion in the brain, and they have a control panel. And ultimately, without spoiler alert, it's about a little girl who is sad because she's moved schools and she's missing her friends and her old school. And joy in her brain is working so hard to make her happy all the time and won't let sadness have any control over the control panel. And of course, hilarious and worrying things happen in her brain. The train of thought goes off its tracks. The memories start to get all messy and broken. And so, basically she has a bit of a collapse because she's just not prepared to be sad, because she's worried that if she's sad, her parents will be upset, or that she should be happy because her parents want her to be happy. So it's a really lovely movie with lessons for everybody in it, Chris.
Oh, for sure.
I feel ashamed to be watching Inside Out.
I remember watching it actually, and I think I was pretty fathomed by it, like that they actually went to that extent to actually go that far with it.
Yeah.
And it's super nice to see that it shows you that you need all these emotions too.
Yes, and that's the problem, is that I think a lot of our Western ways of dealing with emotions are really to try just to get rid of them rather than sitting with emotion. And that's also where I think a lot of the strategies that involve kind of meditation or mindfulness are very, very useful in assisting with anxiety, and they're really useful to have in your toolbox if you experience high levels of anxiety in ongoing ways. And just that moment, to learning to just take life one moment at a time. Mind you, really, really, really hard to do when you took brain. Not possible to do when you took brain. So there's a kind of a time and a place for all the different strategies. And ultimately, Chris, if people are really debilitated by anxiety, then it's probably worth a trip to the GP. One, because a GP can do some basic checks to just make sure that there's nothing biological going on in your body. Things like thyroid and iron levels can impact how we feel and how anxious we might feel. And so a good GP will often test those out for you if you say you're having ongoing issues with anxiety. And then often they will refer you, we have in Australia the mental health care plan system now. So often they will suggest that you have some treatment with a psychologist, and they will refer you to one using a mental health care plan, which means that some of those sessions can be rebatable.
Yeah, definitely. And that's pretty good opportunity for people to kind of, I guess, if they, it takes a lot of people to build that courage as well to get that mental health plan. But it's super beneficial too. I have plenty of friends who are very open about these things, and so am I for sure. It's super empowering to see the impact that it can make, and it kind of takes away that worrying factor of money too. So I think everyone should even just go there and just express themselves. It's just super nice. I go every now and again and I'm like, all right, I need to get some stuff off my chest.
Absolutely.
Here I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And the psychologist can work out, they will listen to you, they will understand all the different kind of factors that we know affect anxiety, and they can develop up an individual plan. So it might have some meditation in it, or it might have some cognitive behavior therapy in it, or it might have some behavioral activation, or it might have some challenges in it, Chris, to challenge the avoidance, because things like phobias, obviously, we need to manage. So back in kind of, I often think of, this might be a bit before your time, Chris, but Indiana Jones movies.
I know Indiana Jones.
He always seems to get, at some point in the movie, he gets stuck in a pit full of spiders or scorpions or something like that. And back in the day, when I first started psychology in the 80s, that was a technique we would use to manage, to teach people strategies for managing. We would actually kind of flood them. We would go, okay, so you're scared of this? Here, just have some, and we'll lock you in the room and you'll get over it, which was a terribly cruel way of doing that treatment. these days we understand that putting people into chook brain mode is not helpful because no one can learn in chook brain mode. And so what we do is we work with people to work out like a graded process of things they might be avoiding. So it might be that they're avoiding social interactions. And so again, it needs to be very individual. We'll kind of give social interactions a bit of a rating between 0 and 100 in terms of scariness, or we call them subjective units of distress. And, and so, yeah, and to work with, so we want to avoid anything that's kind of 80, 90 or 100. And we also want to avoid anything that's 20 or 30 because that's kind of easy peasy. It's not really teaching anyone. We're kind of in this working zone around 40, 50, 60. And that's where we target, getting people to try and give that level a go, to go and do something that's kind of that scary, not that scary, that's that scary, to use all the things that they've been taught to do, their breathing, their thinking tools, and maybe even practice it in the session, and then go and try that and stay in that situation until that wave of anxiety starts to come down. And then once, of course, you've managed that one, then you can go up to your next level activity. And so that's why we call it a graded program, that people can be assisted to go one step at a time, a little bit like PT when you're trying to build up a muscle. Chris, it's you don't start it with too heavy or you end up with an injury. Yeah. So it's this idea that you've got to get it kind of Goldilocks just right and then build from there. And what happens is I see it all the time, and it's delightful, is people will get a little bit of momentum and then they'll be able to go straight for the 100 out of 100 scary. Because it doesn't seem 100 anymore, because they've built up that confidence and they've tried a few things on, and their life has kind of carried them, that momentum has carried them to be able to do something they've been avoiding doing for a long time.
That's super good, because I just think about walking upstairs, just one step at a time. You just keep going until you keep going, then you reach the top, and then all happy days. Go find some more stairs.
So you just got to find the right step to start on. You don't want to try and take too giant a leap to the top step, because it's likely you're going to fall over.
Absolutely.
So just building up little bit by little bit, and that helps to break down that avoidance that we know that can keep anxiety perpetuated, can keep it going. The other thing that keeps anxiety going, Chris, is reassurance. when people check in all the time, and this is particularly a characteristic of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, but it's common with lots of people who have lots of worries anyway. They'll just check. It's kind of like that, does my bum look big in this question, or do I look okay? And that, a little bit of that's okay some of the time, but some people really rely heavily on that. And I think in this day and age with social media and Instagram and all that sort of stuff, I think people will check to see, there's kind of that FOMO, they'll check to see where they are in some sort of social ladder, and they will, their brains can get really caught up in anxiety about not fitting in, not belonging to a tribe, and just, they can get really anxious about that too. So one of the things we also talk to people about is about having to push on without too much reassurance. And when we're working with children, it might be just learning to do things by yourself. So you might go the first time with mum, the second time mum might stop halfway, the third time mum might just go to the school gate, for instance, and then the next level mum just opens the car door for you, and the next level after that, I forgot how many levels, mum might just slow the car down and push you out, and you're good to go. So it's that kind of just not spending. We can get really, and our anxiety can kind of get rewarded, or we feel better for a moment. So if the anxiety builds up and we check in with someone, do I look okay? And they go, yeah, and we go, oh, cool, until we have that thought again, and it builds up. So we end up getting this kind of anxiety starts here, and it builds up, we check, it comes down, but then as soon as we think about it, and so the general level of that is still going up. But people will work really hard just to get a little dip. We need to make sure that whatever strategies we're using, we stay in the scary part until the scariness comes right down, comes right away. And so that can mean doing some behavioural experiments, and psychologists can help people work out and tailor those for themselves. And also, I think it's just that making a declaration to another human that you're going to try something.
Yeah, definitely.
very similar to PT, the fact that you make a commitment, and so you're much more likely to do it because you turn up. And I think sometimes when people see a psychologist, there's someone else they've made a commitment to. They're much more likely to follow through. Even they might know what it is that they should be doing anyway. A little bit more guidance and much more of a commitment to someone else, and knowing that someone gets it and can witness their bravery, because it takes huge bravery, and I feel incredibly privileged. I've seen amazing bravery in my work over the years, from little people to nanas. They've done really, really brave things, and their lives are much happier.
Yeah. And it's super nice too, so fulfilling just to have that opportunity to see someone open up to you fully, for sure. And I think I didn't realize as well how hard it can be to open up to. And when someone opens up, it's super nice and super rewarding to know that you're that person that they've gone to, that they feel safe with.
Yeah.
But it's also good with that reassurance as well, that obviously, would you say it's a bad thing if someone becomes a rock for someone as well?
Well, I think this is getting it to that just right level, Chris. As I said, if we want to be vulnerable, then we want to make sure that someone has our back. But if someone's checking and texting you a gazillion times a day just to know that you're there, or that you're not having an affair or something else like that, lots of anxieties in relationships about that, then that's starting to interfere with your day-to-day smooth running of the life operation. And so that's when that's an example where I get them to go, hang on, this is getting a little bit too much. This is getting beyond just occasional reassurance. I think there's actually a problem here. And often if someone has disclosed concerns and anxiety to you, Chris, and you feel okay about managing it, but it starts to move to the next step where you're not sure, that's definitely when I'll encourage someone to say, hey, how about we make an appointment and I'll come to the doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I'll come together, I'll come in the room if you want, or I'll stay out. So, you can kick me out, or you want me to make the appointment, so that you can actually kind of help to segue them into getting some help. It is tricky though. Some people will fluff around and they'll take a few false starts, but that's okay. And many psychologists have people who don't show up for that first appointment.
Yeah.
And so we just have to wait until people do.
And that's the thing about even the little graph that you drew. And, you'll even see that, it's so interesting seeing those graphs, because those are the same kind of graphs that I do for weight loss, or I do for exercise commitment, and it's all the same. It's never a nice straight line, as much as people like to see the little peak. It doesn't happen like that, unfortunately.
No, I think that's part of being human, Chris, and having these. Yeah, and we've got to give it to this lump of whatever this is we call the brain. It is just incredible that because we've got this thing, that we can do so many amazing things. We can build buildings, we can do some terrible things to ourselves and the planet as well. But it's just it never ceases to amaze me what potential we have there. And so I have great hope that we also have lots of potential to get on top of things as well. But it also makes sense that it kind of goes a bit like a moth sometimes.
Yeah.
Moths sometimes go forward, but they tend to go all over. I think there's a joke in there about moths farting or something, where they go off in different directions. That's what our brains tend to do. Our brain's job is to think. Our heart's job is to pump blood. Our lungs' job is to take in the air, and our brain's job is to think. And it will think random kind of stuff all the time. And we have the ability to be able to just let it do that, or we can override it. Kind of like tuning into a radio station or a TV show. You can change the channel depending on what's in there. And so we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the things that are going to be most helpful, and letting the other stuff just drift away. But that we're also paying attention to the stuff that, even though it feels uncomfortable, we're paying attention to the stuff we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, there's so many doors that could be open from this anxiety thing. I'm trying to restrain myself not to ask questions, because I know one question will be oh, look, what's identity, and what's this, and
absolutely, Chris. It's fundamental to a lot of psychological practice is helping people understand anxiety, and it manifests itself in all sorts of different ways. And I do have a really strong belief that if people understand more about how anxiety is in their own bodies, and ways that they can manage it, and just kind of learn to drive it. The feelings of the dashboard of the car, that we're kind of the vehicle that is our body, and we just need to get to know it and learn to drive it and make sure we're steering it in the directions that we want to drive.
No, definitely. I love the analogies too. Really good. Completely understood that. I was like, yes, I got to drive my own car.
That's right. And don't get angry with the dashboard. If the dashboard's giving you a feeling, there's no point getting angry with the dashboard. There's something else going on. Maybe you do need to stop the petrol. That's right. No point just turning the. I think in the olden days we used to just turn the radio up to cover that knocking noise. So just keep driving. That can only lead to trouble, and that's what happens when we don't pay attention to our feelings and just allow them to be. And when we allow them to be, we can sometimes be brave enough and go into, well, what's the need that's underneath that feeling, and how do I get that need met in a healthy way.
Cars, definitely, that's the best thing too. And definitely looking at the battery, looking at the oil. The car can look really good from the outside, but how well is it functioning from the inside? So definitely a good thing for everyone to really think about fine-tuning themselves in that way, and understanding that you do need petrol and you do need all these other things to.
We're after a smooth ride, Chris.
Absolutely. But it's all right if you break down every now and again.
That's right. And that's when you call the tribe and say, "Help! I've broken down," and they come and assist you.
No, perfect. That is the best analogy. That is very worked well.
You're welcome. You can take that one and use that.
I'm going to steal it.
You're welcome.
But I will leave it at that today. But super grateful, and thanks so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I love the analogies, love the explanation. I feel like I myself understand a little bit more about anxiety, like a lot more about how to kind of more so just like definitely got the fine tuning the car out of that. That's what I got. And the chook brain is, I can't stop thinking about like a chook, just like running around aimlessly. But really informative, really enjoyed it, and really appreciate your time. So thanks so much for jumping on today.
It's an absolute pleasure, Chris.
Wonderful. Oh no.